I'm currently holding the highest rated novel of all time. It's not a religious book. It's not one of Shakespeare's plays. It's not even one of the great American novels or some literary classic. But before we discuss which book it is and why so many have regarded it so highly amongst the consensus of all who've reviewed it, let's quantify how we can reach the conclusion that this is indeed the highest rated novel of all time. No, we have not gone back in time to read every review of every book ever, nor have we pulled the opinions of everyone who's ever read a good book. But for the purpose of this video, I don't think we need to, because there are already websites where people can share their opinions, rate titles, and review books, the largest and most esteemed of which is undoubtedly Goodreads. Here, users can mark a book as to be read, currently reading, or finished, but more importantly to our discussion, they can rate a book between 1 and 5 stars and share their reviews. In my opinion, it's one of the most important websites around today, as it pushes people to read in an age where there's far more hyper-stimulating audiovisual content in abundance. Unlike Rotten Tomatoes, which aggregates reviews of films before the internet's existence, a book's Goodreads ranking relies solely on contemporary reviews and rankings produced by individuals like you or I, as well as professional critical opinions if they're shared to the site. So if we're using Goodreads as the benchmark for the best rated of all books ever, we would need to content ourselves with the understanding that what modern people enjoy reading may not be as universally appreciated as it may have been in the past, and vice versa. It's also important to note that Goodreads does skew towards fantasy and young adult fiction as being more popular, for better or worse, for our purposes today. We need to find a book with a large enough pool of reviewers to be truly indicative of a masterpiece of literature. For instance, if you just came out with a book and it has 100 reviews and 99 were really good, then wow, you have a really good book. But if you've got a book with 1,000 reviews and 999 were positive, then wow, that's truly an amazing feat. But even then, 1,000 reviews is still a pretty niche audience. We'll be looking at books with over 100,000 reviews, as the chances of everyday readers who aren't fans of the genre in question will be more likely to pick up the book at random, seeing that it's made itself onto a bestseller list. If we were to narrow the search results to 1 million ratings and more, it would quickly become a popularity contest between Harry Potter and classic literature. So we'll stick to the 100,000 rating minimum. But just to note, this tops anything over 10,000 ratings as well. So it's extremely expansive how popular and how liked this novel is. We also won't be including any anthologies, any short story or poetry collections, box sets, graphic novels, or anything of the sort. But for those interested, the highest rated graphic novel that we found with the 100,000 rating minimum was Calvin and Hobbes Volume 1 with a rating of 4.60, which is a huge number. So many people like that series. But enough beating around the bush. What is the highest rated novel of all time? Let me just put the sleeve on. I'll be right back. I wanted to keep you guys guessing and I didn't want you to peek at the cover, so I took the sleeve off. But Words of Radiance, the second novel in Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archive, is by a long shot the highest rated novel of all time according to over 160,000 people who've rated it. With an average rating of 4.77 stars, this is as close to perfection as you're going to get on the entirety of Goodreads. It's long been my favorite fictional work, actually, so I was stunned to find out that it appealed to such a large swath of individuals as it is. I know you were probably hoping it was another book that you enjoy, and are feverishly typing how poor of a judge Goodreads actually is. Well, Words of Radiance is also tied as the highest rated book on Amazon as well. And now's where people will likely drop off the video or dislike in a rage. But why is this the highest rated novel of all time? I have a few theories. The first theory is it's simply a good book. There's no getting around that. It is. But it's a book that isn't propelled by a young adult audience who are likely to rate it higher. There are a few reasons I can propel it above other fantasy novels or other novels in general. First and foremost, before the Stormlight Archive ever existed, Brandon Sanderson was well known in the fantasy community for his ability to craft and create new and imaginative worlds, and to weave into those worlds strange but intricate magic systems that would shape and stretch each world's physical limitations. It's incredible. So if you've liked any of his previous works, like Mistborn or Elantris or Warbreaker, you're more likely to pick up his new series. The Stormlight Archive is also a massively huge project. Each book averages out to about 400,000 words, so it's daunting for those who aren't accustomed to reading huge tomes of literature, but fantasy fans are. It's also a sequel to an already great book with a similar size. If you get through the first book and you don't really like it, your chances of going on to the second book are severely stunted, so it's conceivable that only fans of that type of literature are the ones reading it. All of this, in theory, can be weighed against the novel's perceived greatness. But the argument that a book or series is too big or daunting to read and review it negatively is a flimsy one. Again, over 160,000 people rated this novel. People really like it. I know what you're thinking, that's only the highest because it's a sequel. If we use the same parameters, but remove all sequels from the list, guess what comes out on top? The Way of Kings, the first novel in the Stormlight Archive, is now the highest rated novel of all time at 4.65 stars. The third book in the series, Oathbringer, is just a notch below the first one in terms of rating at 4.64 stars. The series averages to an astounding 4.69 stars between all its novels. To put that into perspective, George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire's first 5 novels average out to about 4.37 stars. And if we throw in young adult fiction, Sarah J. Maas' 7-book Throne of Glass series averages out to about 4.48, and Rowling's 7-book Harry Potter series adds out to about 4.52. All told, far more people have read the Harry Potter series than Stormlight Archive, so technically, there are way more positive reviews and ratings for the Harry Potter franchise than there are for Stormlight Archive, but when averaged out with the negative reviews, the gap is pretty sizably in Stormlight Archive's favor. From a purely statistical standpoint, Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archive is by far the highest rated series out there, and the title Words of Radiance is as apt of a book title as it is a description of its contents. It's my favorite fantasy series, and it will undoubtedly be held up against the greats at some point, if it isn't already being held up to that point. Classic literature really doesn't hold a torch to the series, but that doesn't really surprise me too much considering how those books were shoved in young people's faces, young kids' faces when they were in school and they were forced to read those books. So naturally they would look back on those with negative emotions. The highest rated of all classic novels that I saw within that 100,000 minimum range was To Kill a Mockingbird at 4.27. I recently read book 3, Oathbringer. Well, I listened to it. I own the first 2 books in physical form, but I've also listened to all 3 of the books on Audible because it's such an incredibly immersive experience. Like I said, these books are incredibly long, but each of the novels, as narrated by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, a husband and wife duo that just do fantastic work, each novel takes up more time to listen to than it would to watch the entirety of all extant Marvel Studios films that have been released up to this point. And that's a pretty apt way to describe it. It's kind of like reading a Marvel Cinematic Universe storyline, but in a fantasy setting. I would say The Way of Kings is pretty much equivalent to Phase 1 up until the Avengers. Then the book series kind of skips over whatever happens in Phase 2, and then Words of Radiance is kind of like Phase 3 up to Infinity War because it ends on such a cliffhanger. And then Oathbringer, which I don't have the physical copy of, but I do have the Audible copy, kind of feels like Endgame in its epicness through, I don't know how far in advance, Marvel Studios films will go, but it feels like whatever is next in that lineup of films. That's how epic these films are. They're like superhero fantasy novels, but even that is doing them injustice because it's a masterpiece of literature. The books are just that epic. And speaking about Marvel films, as there will inevitably be, a couple comments at least of people asking when the next Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline video is coming out. It's coming. Please, it's coming. Every day that you ask me about it is a day I do not work on it. Just keep that in mind. If you're intrigued with the Stormlight Archive, Words of Radiance, Way of Kings, Oathbringer, I will leave a link in the description below so that you can go and buy yourself a physical or digital or audio copy of the book. And if you do buy from the link in the description, we will get a small cut of whatever you spend in your shopping experience over at Amazon. So if you choose to do that, thank you. We really do appreciate it. I'd also be remiss not to let you know that you can get the first 2 books, which includes Words of Radiance, with a free 30-day Audible subscription. Again, that's over 100 hours worth of content altogether. That's totally free, and that's not including the 2 Audible originals you get for free every month. So just throwing that out there. Link in the description as well. Totally free. You get to keep the books even if you don't continue with the Audible membership, and it's totally worth it. I've mentioned that deal a number of times, but this is by far the most bang for your buck that you're going to get out of that, I assure you. I've wanted to make a video on the Stormlight Archive for a while, but I didn't know where to start because I just finished reading book 3 a couple weeks ago, and it's still blowing my mind just thinking about it. Every chapter starts with some pretty pertinent world building, then it interlaces some character development, necessary character development too. Stuff you wouldn't even think of, especially with the flashback stuff, which I'm genuinely not a fan of flashbacks, but this series does it so incredibly well. And then every chapter ends with some major revelation, and then you're whisked off to the next point of view character, and it's like, come on. But there's about 122 chapters in this book, not including the interlude chapters, so there's a lot of that going on. That was in Oathbringer. There's a bit less chapters in this book, but this is still a really good book, probably the best book out there. Kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Brandon Sanderson has a literary universe of novels that takes place in a universe called the Cosmere, and I believe it's 10 different planets, of which 5, 6, or 7 of them have stories written about them. I think 4 of which have actual novels that have been dedicated to. We have the Mistborn series, which was, one of his first big forays into that universe. Then he had Elantris, or I think Elantris was first, then Mistborn, and then he did Warbreaker. And then the Stormlight Archive is like the cream of the crop when it comes to his vision for the Cosmere, or at least that he's released so far. And he also has a graphic novel series called White Sand, which I have somewhere over there. But that also takes place in this Cosmere. And every world has a different type of physical setting. Every world has a different, different peoples, different magic systems. And somehow, if you really look hard, there are interlinking things between the novels and different series that, in theory, and he has kind of promised this in passing, that they will connect in some way in the future. But this is long ways off. Enjoy the Stormlight Archive for what it is. What it is, actually, is a planned 10-book series. And Brandon Sanderson is such a prolific writer that you do not have to worry about this series ever not being finished, like you would with Rothfuss or Martin. But in each of those books is about 4 or 5 different parts, each of which is about the length of an average novel. So really, you're talking about, a 40-book series in a 10-book series. And in that 10-book series, it's broken into the first 5 books and the second 5 books. And the second 5 books are a different time period with a few overlap. It's a huge, huge project. I don't want to overwhelm you. Start with The Way of Kings. You will enjoy it. I know you will, because, come on, this has a 4.77 stars on Goodreads. That's unheard of with anything. Supposedly there are proposed films or potentially shows based on the Stormlight Archive. Honestly, I don't think CGI is there yet. I don't think it's cheap enough to produce something as expensive as the Stormlight Archive requires it to be. There is not a single shot in this series that I can imagine wouldn't need CGI. And I'm being 100% honest with that. CGI is not good enough for this yet. It cannot be in a movie. It just cannot work in that form. It needs to be dedicated to a series. And if it does happen, I know it will be ruined. There's no way you can fit this into a movie series and then keep the audience like coming back for more. Hollywood has trained us to like big franchise stuff. But if people don't know, the average viewer doesn't know what Stormlight Archive is, it's not going to sell any tickets, so you're not going to get to see Words of Radiance anyway. Make a show about it. It's much better. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and if you are at all interested in this massive collection of Star Trek books behind me, we recently did a video on that, unboxing that, the story behind it, because it is a pretty emotional story in my opinion. I haven't read a single one of these, but I'll get to it. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy this video. Please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and comment your thoughts. I would like to hear what you have to say. Have a good one.